There have been reports of several countries signing trade agreements with China to settle transactions in Chinese yuan, giving the impression that the yuan is poised to challenge the US dollar as a dominant currency in the international arena. Some Westerners have expressed concern about the decline of the US dollar's reserve currency status, while some Chinese patriots have started to fantasize about the joy of traveling abroad with the internationalized Chinese yuan, likening it to a golden phoenix rising from the ashes. However, all of this is just a superficial observation. Only one statement is accurate: the US dollar's reserve currency status will indeed decline, as evidenced by some countries allocating a portion of their reserves to gold and a small portion to the Chinese yuan and their agreements with China. However, this series of dazzling actions does not prove two things: first, that the US dollar's reserve currency status is being replaced, and second, that the Chinese yuan is becoming a comparable international reserve currency alongside the US dollar. The US dollar will still be the main international reserve currency, and the Chinese yuan cannot be compared to it. Why is that? Firstly, let's take a look at the unique characteristics of the US dollar as an international reserve currency. Firstly, the US dollar is freely convertible. Anyone holding any amount of US dollars can exchange them for local currency in almost any country in the world. Therefore, almost no country in the world refuses to accept US dollars as any form of income. Secondly, the US dollar not only exists within the US but also exists in large quantities outside of the US. It exists not only in large quantities in foreign central bank reserve accounts but also in the hands of foreign financial institutions, other organizations, and individuals outside the US. For example, in Hong Kong, people freely hold their own Hong Kong dollar and US dollar accounts in banks. Thirdly, the US dollar is currently the strongest safe haven currency in the world. When people panic due to natural disasters or man-made crises and worry about the safety of their wealth, many choose to exchange their own currency for US dollars and purchase US securities to avoid the risk of currency depreciation in their own country. The US Treasury bonds, which the US issues in large amounts, are the main financial products that investors around the world purchase as a safe haven asset. For example, the banking crisis that originated in the United States in March of this year spread to Europe. First, there was a run on Swiss credit and a sell-off of its stocks, which led the Swiss government to force Swiss banks to acquire Swiss credit. This was followed by a sell-off of Deutsche Bank stocks. When Deutsche Bank was sold off, the US dollar immediately surged. This is because people, under the fear of a possible chain reaction of bank failures, rushed to buy US dollar assets as a hedge. Despite the banking crisis originating in the United States, the US dollar's safe haven status remained intact. This is because there is no other currency in the world that has been so stable and sought after for such a long time. For example, the banking crisis that originated in the United States in March of this year spread to Europe. First, there was a run on Swiss credit and a sell-off of its stocks, which led the Swiss government to force Swiss banks to acquire Swiss credit. This was followed by a sell-off of Deutsche Bank stocks. When Deutsche Bank was sold off, the US dollar immediately surged. This is because people, under the fear of a possible chain reaction of bank failures, rushed to buy US dollar assets as a hedge. Despite the banking crisis originating in the United States, the US dollar's safe haven status remained intact. This is because there is no other currency in the world that has been so stable and sought after for such a long time. Why has the international reserve status of the US dollar, which possesses such unique qualities, declined? The US dollar's international reserve status was established after World War II. Even during the process of the US going off the gold standard in the 1960s and 1970s, which involved some instances of breach of faith, the status of the US dollar was not affected at all. However, as the US's economic policies increasingly deviated from traditional currency values, successive US governments have implemented policies of interest rate cuts, interest rate hikes, quantitative easing, and tightening to address economic recessions. These cycles over the years have not only hurt the US economy, but also affected the economies of other countries. For example, if an organic life form is exposed to the sun and then frozen, and this happens repeatedly, the life form will inevitably be scarred. This has led to the EU countries establishing a unified currency to counteract the negative effects of the US dollar, leading to the creation of the euro, and also caused other countries to reduce their holdings of US dollars and diversify their foreign exchange reserves. In 1999, when the euro was born, the US dollar accounted for 71% of the world's international reserves, but today, it has only 59%. Without considering history, this percentage would still indicate an important reserve status. Currently, some countries settle their transactions using the Chinese yuan, which is due to their dissatisfaction with the US sanctions on Russia, as well as the freezing and seizure of Russian assets denominated in US dollars. Some of these countries are concerned that such actions may happen to them as well. However, the majority of countries in the world may not be concerned about this issue, and therefore, the international reserve status of the US dollar will likely continue to remain the world's number one. The recent news about the Chinese yuan being used as a settlement currency or becoming a reserve currency for some countries last week is unlikely to affect the US dollar's status as a safe haven. The specters of banking crises and conflicts between major powers are still looming, and it is likely that we will see the US dollar exchange rate soar immediately after either of these major issues occur. The recent news about the Chinese yuan being used as a settlement currency or becoming a reserve currency for some countries last week is unlikely to affect the US dollar's status as a safe haven. The specters of banking crises and conflicts between major powers are still looming, and it is likely that we will see the US dollar exchange rate soar immediately after either of these major issues occur. Firstly, the Chinese yuan is still subject to foreign exchange controls and is extremely restricted. The rule allowing every Chinese citizen to exchange up to $50,000 per year has been in effect for several years, but some regions still enforce it while others have made it very inconvenient. These controls will not change just because the yuan is used more frequently in international settlements. Additionally, since the purchasing power of the yuan is significantly lower than the current USD to yuan exchange rate, once free exchange is implemented, the yuan will inevitably experience a significant depreciation. Readers may know that the US government believes China is a currency manipulator, artificially lowering its exchange rate to stimulate exports. So why do I think the yuan is actually overvalued instead of undervalued? The reason the US believes this is because of China's tax rebate system for exports. Under the rebate system, Chinese exporters can dump their goods onto foreign markets at unprofitable or even loss-making prices, but they can still receive a 17% tax rebate from the Chinese government. This means that Chinese exporters are actually making profits from tax rebates rather than the goods themselves. Of course, the practical effect of this policy is to lower the value of the yuan and compete in foreign markets with lower prices. Therefore, while the US considers China to be a currency manipulator, this does not negate the fact that the value of the yuan is overvalued. The current exchange rate of the yuan, which is tightly maintained by the Chinese government, can only be kept in a nursery. Secondly, the freely convertible part of the Chinese yuan is known as offshore yuan, which is mainly traded in Hong Kong. This system follows the typical style of the Chinese Communist Party in solving problems, dual-track system plus discrimination/preferential treatment. The discrimination is against Chinese people within China, and the preferential treatment is for foreigners outside China. Under this system, the yuan can only be used for trade, not for finance, and cannot provide the large-scale financial tools and markets that the US dollar as an international reserve currency offers to the world. Regardless of onshore or offshore RMB, there will not be an open financial tool and market for the world in the form of the US dollar, and it is unlikely to happen in the future. This is because the economic system of the CCP is very rigid, and it cannot withstand the volatility brought about by the internationalization of the renminbi like the US government can handle the volatility brought about by the US dollar. During the Soros attack on the Hong Kong dollar in 1998, the Chinese people were relieved that they had a closed foreign exchange system, and therefore were not attacked like the Thai baht and the Hong Kong dollar due to the free currency system. Of course, today, more than 20 years later, China's foreign exchange and gold reserves have increased, but the nature of its system has not changed. It is completely impossible to integrate with the free currency system and can only continue to play the role of a closed system currency in a conservatory. It is difficult to find a mechanism to develop a large-scale financial market for offshore renminbi. Thirdly, the essence of RMB settlement may be just to participate in barter trade between resource complementary countries. The countries that have signed RMB settlement agreements with China currently have a resource complementary relationship with China. Basically, these four countries, Brazil, Russia, Saudi Arabia, and South Africa, export oil, minerals, agricultural products, etc. to China, and at the same time, they can purchase industrial products from China. If they do not need to import industrial products from China, holding RMB is not very meaningful. Thirdly, the essence of RMB settlement may be just to participate in barter trade between resource complementary countries. The countries that have signed RMB settlement agreements with China currently have a resource complementary relationship with China. Basically, these four countries, Brazil, Russia, Saudi Arabia, and South Africa, export oil, minerals, agricultural products, etc. to China, and at the same time, they can purchase industrial products from China. If they do not need to import industrial products from China, holding RMB is not very meaningful. Fourthly, as the largest economy among these countries, China itself is an unstable factor. In recent years, its extreme policies, including the zero-COVID policy and a series of industry policies, have not only harmed the Chinese economy but also affected its trading partners. Now, the West is hoping for China's economic recovery to boost its own, but the ruling Communist Party has not only moved politically to the extreme left but also lost some of the professional and administrative management abilities it once had in its personnel composition, returning to the level before the reform and opening up. This newly composed ruling group faces a myriad of problems in its economic and social system after its own destruction, and its governance has been one of self-destruction and repeated damage. Such a regime's control over its currency cannot ultimately be stable. Wealth is most afraid of volatility and risk, and the BRICS may ultimately be just a hollow name. In summary, the international reserve currency status of the US dollar has been weakening, as evidenced by its declining share of international reserves. However, there is still no other international reserve currency that can rival the US dollar. As a reserve currency under the rule of the Chinese Communist Party, the yuan has little prospect. Ultimately, countries that have complementary resources can engage in barter trade without the need for currency settlement. The yuan and the currencies of other countries may mainly serve as units of account.